As most of you know, I have 4 daughters, 2 son-in-laws, and 2 increasingly opinionated granddaughters. And when it comes time to decide where we might want to go on a vacation or a trip, there are usually 2 main contenders: beach or mountain. And we've got family members who lean both ways. So when the discussion begins to get passionate, we sometimes find ourselves looking to mediate and persuade, comparing the options. Either option will be beautiful, I might say. So maybe we should go to the beach because it's warmer. Or no matter what we choose, we won't be bored, but we can lay by the pool here in Texas. So maybe it's better to go sledding in the mountains. Or the good news is we can easily get to the mountains or the beach in one day's drive. But there's a promotion on flights at the beach. So flying is better than driving. Things like that. Or, depending on the mood, we might decide to go scorched earth in our persuasion by contrasting the options to draw out a clear choice. Nobody likes to be hot, and the beach is hot. Everybody likes snow, and the mountains have snow. There's one clear choice. Or, the mountains cost money to enjoy. The beach costs nothing to enjoy. The beach it is. Or, people die on the ski slopes, but I have yet to hear of a beach volleyball death, so basically we are deciding between life and death. You get the picture. Through comparison and contrast, we are seeking to determine the value of a beach trip or the value of a trip to the mountains. On a much more significant scale, many of us go to Scripture and specifically to wisdom literature, seeking wisdom to apply to our actions, morality, direction, or life practices. Whether in interactions at work, dialogue at home, or even in solo research of a product or idea, the use of contrast and comparison is often deployed. Not surprisingly, Scripture uses this technique too, especially in the book of Proverbs. Proverbs by nature lend themselves towards these kinds of examples. This week, we'll look at places most specifically in the book of Proverbs, but also some outside of Proverbs that use contrast and comparison to communicate wisdom and spiritual principles. Before we get started, let me define what we're talking about. Simply understood, we're going to be looking for places in the text that seek to assign value or identify wisdom, prudence, or truth by comparing 2 things or contrasting 2 things. On rare occasion, we might see more than 2 things compared or contrasted, but most often, these are going to be limited to 2 simple items or examples. Speaking of examples, let's find some. In chapter 15 of Proverbs, in verse 16, we read, "Better is a little with the fear of the Lord than great treasure and trouble with it." Here, the author compares a person who has little earthly treasure and fears the Lord to a person who has great earthly treasure. In this type of comparison, we see overt affirmation of the latter by the author's use of the word better. In fact, many comparative texts are going to use the word better than or greater than, leaving little room for assumption. And at the end of the day, that's what comparison is used for. It's a literary tool designed to further clarify or increase understanding of the author's intended message. We can take great comfort in knowing that it has always been God's desire for us to know Him, to know His heart, and to know how to flourish as His children. Comparative texts help us do that. Contrasting texts also help our understanding, enhance our comprehension, just in a slightly different way. Now, they offer a dimension of clarity that isn't like something else, but is rather unlike something else. For example, look with me at Proverbs chapter 10, verse 1. It reads, "A wise son makes a glad father, but a foolish son is a sorrow to his mother." Now, if comparison and contrast always tripped you up in school, let me put your mind at ease. They're two sides of the same coin, and both serve a similar purpose, to illuminate the text. So the goal of this study will not be that we categorize every single instance correctly. It's going to be to draw out the meaning correctly. Both comparison and contrast help us do that. This verse, Proverbs 10:1, is contrast because it juxtaposes something opposite, a wise son and a foolish son. Interestingly, comparison also contrasts at times, but comparisons often contrast to degrees. As we saw in the previous example, one thing is declared better than, greater than, more than, less than. Some way it is ranked. Contrasting statements tend to be polarized, completely oppositional. Chapters 1 through 9 consistently contrast Lady Wisdom and Lady Folly. They are opposites. So we're not ranking them or comparing them to one another. We're showing them oppositionally. Here's how ChatGPT explains it. If you can paraphrase it as X outranks Y, it's comparative. If it reads X and Y go different directions, it's contrasting. Unless you think comparison and contrast find their only scriptural home in the book of Proverbs, I think it's valuable to zoom out and look more broadly at the Bible. We find comparison and contrast throughout the Psalms. Think of Psalm 84:10, where it says, "Better is one day in your court than 1,000 elsewhere." Or Psalm 97:9, which reads, "For you, Lord, are the most high over all the earth. You are exalted far above all gods." Or Psalm 1, which begins the Psalter by contrasting the way of the righteous to the way of the wicked. We could look at Ecclesiastes, which has clusters of better than comparisons. You can look specifically at chapter 7 for that. But perhaps the most interesting is where we find comparison and contrast in the New Testament. Chronicled in Matthew and known to us as the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus himself speaks in proverbial comparison and contrast when he speaks of two gates, two trees, two builders. In Luke 6, we find significant contrasts between blessing and woe. Even in James 3, we see wisdom from above compared to and found better than earthly wisdom. As you read this week's passages that include contrast and comparison, make note of them. Highlight them in different colors. Ask yourself, what wisdom is illuminated? What path is highlighted? What truth is revealed? What principle might I be called upon to apply in my own life right now? We want to be smart students, but our ultimate goal is to be wise women, living in complete contrast to the foolishness that surrounds me. Trust me, it's worth it.